Well, British screen legend Sir Norman Wisdom passed away earlier this week. He was 95. Best known for a series of comedy films produced between 1953 and 1966, featuring his hapless on-screen character Norman Pitkin. He went on to forge a Broadway and television career. Incredibly, he continued acting until he was 90. He spent most of the later part of his life on the Isle of Man, and he died on Monday as a consequence of a series of strokes. Now, our next guest, Helen James, recorded an interview with Norman when he was 91, which turned out to be his last interview. Helen's an experienced presenter, producer and creative director, and she's formed her own video production company after 20 years working in radio and television for the BBC and ITV, and she's on the line from the UK right now. Helen James, good morning.
Hello, John and Tony. How are you?
Well, thank you. I guess you didn't realise at the time that when you were interviewing Sir Norman Wisdom, it would be the last interview he ever gave.
Well, do you know what? It was just such a privilege and honour to be in his company and with that of his family. But you knew it was very special. I'd spoken at length with his family and with his agent, Johnny Mann, about Norman's life because I knew I had to know almost as much as he did to coax it out of him. By then, you know, he was suffering from memory loss. And Alzheimer's was sort of hitting him hard, really. But he still was extremely cheeky and, you know, in his lucid moments was unbelievable in the interview. And it was just he'd just come off a cruise. I mean, he'd been entertaining the holidaymakers there with his singing and japes. And I met him at his son's house in Sussex in the south of England. And I was doing a series of reports on Pinewood Studios celebrating their 70th birthday. And, of course, as you say, he made 12 films in 12 years there. His first was Trouble in Store that won him a BAFTA. And I wanted to talk to him about that, but about his whole life, right from the start. You know, he had a really troubled, tough childhood, you know, with his parents splitting up and him going into care. And, you know, he talks about this happening at the age of 9 and then at 14 walking all the way from London to Cardiff to try and get work as a cabin boy. And he just was so overwhelmed and in awe of the army that really, he said, made him, because it was in the army that he developed his sense of humour, his funny walks. He made everyone laugh, even his sergeant major. And through doing boxing as well, he fell in particular ways, you know, and that's how he got his act and went into concert parties and then went on the stage and then went into film. So it was a wonderful, wonderful time to spend with him. And, you know, even then he was cheeky and trying to trip me up when we were walking around outside when I was setting up the camera, you know, and, you know, it was special, and the cheeky glint in his eye, and he was the most modest man. You know, when I mentioned about, you know, Laurel and Hardy praising him, we looked through all these wonderful photographs of, you know, not only his family photographs, but from his films, and there was a signed one by Laurel and Hardy.
Well, that must have been very special. Helen, we were talking just before we got you on air, and I was saying to Tony that he always struck me as harking back to music hall and vaudeville, and there was almost something Chaplin-esque about Norman Wisdom.
Well, yeah, and he was Charlie Chaplin's favourite clown. He followed that sort of slapstick, sort of comedy humour. You know, it's, yeah, I mean, Charlie Chaplin said, "You will follow in my footsteps," and he was truly great. I mean, he really is our national treasure, and, you know, he's, you know, the whole of the UK has been greatly saddened. Well, the whole of the world has been greatly saddened by his death. But, you know, we're celebrating it. And all the time during the interview when he's looking back on his life, you know, he keeps saying, "I'm just a lucky little devil."
Hey, Helen, how did you come... I mean, how come you're so interested in Norman Wisdom? I know he's an English treasure. Did you grow up watching his films?
I did, you know, on the sort of Sunday mornings they used to, and you know, afternoons used to watch them. But no, I mean, I've got an interest in film anyway, and arts and entertainment. I did a lot with ITV on that, and because I was making this program on Pinewood Studios, you know, he made his films there. That connected me with Norman. But, you know, my relatives, you know, my aunt, uncle, my grandmother, you know, they used to roll in the aisles at the cinemas. In fact, you couldn't even get into the cinema in Britain when his films were on. You had to sort of stand outside because it was so packed. He was a sensation, and, you know, a real hit in America too.
I was intrigued that you said he had just come back just before the interview from a cruise where he was entertaining people on a ship.
Yes,
and
cruises, yeah.
and that was at the age of 90. So
91, yeah.
91.
And he still played golf. And he was jogging with me up and down the garden, and he took me into his son's kitchen and was telling me the steps that he learnt in the army how to tap dance. You know, he was an amazing man.
You mentioned that he walked from London to Cardiff, was it? Or somewhere in Wales?
That's right, yeah.
At just 14 years of age. I mean, what brought that about?
To get work, and he worked as a cabin boy on the ships and went to Argentina, and he did a bit of boxing there when he was in Argentina, and then came back and he was a Lipton tea delivery boy, and he did various jobs. So it was really when he went into the army that he sort of found his form. He learnt to play 11 instruments. He was boxing. He was learning to fall and do the funny walks and things, and kept making people laugh when he was in India, falling off a horse, and it was this sort of thing that they said, you have got to entertain the troops, and went into the concert party. And then he played a lot of the music halls, especially Brighton on the south coast of England, and it was then that he was sort of spied upon and said, you've got to go into film.
That's amazing. 11 instruments, because he obviously could sing, and he wrote some of his own hit songs, and quite apart from acting.
And the wonderful thing during the interview that he sort of broke into song, don't laugh at me, 'cause I'm a fool, and he serenaded me, and his voice at 91 was just so beautiful. He was very talented, wrote a lot of songs, obviously sang them in his films as well. A very talented individual, but so modest. He was a real gentleman.
And we're going to, in fact, play that song in a moment or two. We're talking about Norman Wisdom, of course, with Helen James, who is a presenter, a producer, and has her own video company, and did the last interview, a television interview with Norman Wisdom. Hey, a great talent for, in any number of areas, as we just discussed, but did that come out of anywhere? I mean, what did his parents actually do? Were they in any way talented musically, or?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean,
I wonder where it came from then.
His parents split up. I mean, his father was a drunk and used to hit him around. His mother left, so he went into care. And he actually grew up in Deal in Kent. And it was a happy time there with his foster parents. But, he really, there were times when his parents split up that he was sleeping on a park bench in London, with his brother, and didn't have any food.
He must have got the talent from somewhere, though.
Well, it's innate talent, and he worked really hard. His routines, he practiced and practiced and practiced again. He was brilliant. But, when I met him, and I just, he still had his sparkle. He was cheeky, and, it was a real honour and privilege.
Hey, Helen, a curious thing, apparently he was really big in Albania.
Massive, absolutely massive. Well, for a time, Norman's films were the only films allowed in the sort of Soviet sort of dictatorship. So, he was a massive hero, and, in fact, he was a hero across the world, and his catchphrase, Mr. Grimsdale, people used to come up with, when he was abroad, children shouting this, in India or wherever, he was known throughout the globe.
And he also forged a career on Broadway, which, not a lot of entertainers managed to do, make a career on both sides of the Atlantic.
He did, but he decided because of family reasons to return home. So they also had Jerry Lewis out there, which was sort of a similar ilk to what Norman's slapstick humour as well. So, but no, he he made it big on Broadway, and that's where he met Laurel and Hardy for a second time. But no, he came back, I think, for personal reasons, back to the UK. And
how has the news of his death been received in Britain?
Well, he's a national treasure. I mean, he's so loved, and he himself, took so much pleasure from making people laugh and bringing joy into people's lives, and people remember him with a smile on their faces. You can't help that. And in the end, with his memory loss, with Alzheimer's, it's a terrible thing. He lost his memory. He couldn't recall who he was really in the end of the day, and couldn't remember the faces of his family which he adored in his grandsons. So it was very sad. But, you know, at 95, he lived a wonderful life.
Certainly had a full life.
And, you know, as he said in the interview with me, you know, he kept referring to him being a lucky little devil.
Helen, it's been terrific to talk to you. And if people want to see the interview, they can just log on to the internet. It's there on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. They can see it on my website, but it's also on Norman's own, Sir Norman's own website as well. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure talking to you.
That's Helen James, and she's responsible for that interview and runs her own video production company.